Chapter 118. 4. Following the crowd, it was for no other reason than the fact that the location selected for the trials was at one of the three most dangerous places in the constellation land, the Lost Bog Forest. It was said that it was a place of no return, where one would completely lose their bearings once they went inside. If one did not possess some level of skill, it was advised that they do not go in there to court their own death. Although it was a thick and dense forest, but once one passed through 100 meters of poisonous bogland, the center region was a large safe area. The Faint Mist sect had chosen this place because they could on one hand test their disciples' skills, and also to discourage the number of people from coming to watch the battles on the other. After all, if they were to be quashed by the Crimson Land's 8 demons, it wouldn't look too good on them at all. Qing Yu's usual disguise as a man possessed mesmerizing phoenix-like eyes that were incomparably alluring, and coupled with her flawless and exquisitely handsome face, she could not be merely described as being so unbelievably attractive that she dazzled mankind. Qing Bei was her twin brother, and although their faces were about 70 to 80% alike, his eyes were clear and gentle with elegantly handsome facial features. A refined young man unlike Qing Yu's devilish and bewitching beauty. Further comparing them, the personality and mannerisms of these two people were even more different. One was squeaky clean like a deity banished from the heavens, while the other was seductive and alluring like the devil. They attracted quite a good rate of heads being turned their way from people who thought that there would be little young masters with such exquisite faces, highly pleasing to the eye. It could be seen with just one look that they were of noble birth, a member of aristocracy, but it was wondered whether they possessed the ability to successfully reach the center region of the Lost Bog Forest. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qing Bei looked at the forest ahead swirling with a faint mist, and he opened his mouth to say, "We won't encounter the same thing that we did back at Hell's Canyon, will we? Will the entrance disappear altogether as well? Haha, a classic case of bitten once by a snake, and fears the rope on the well for 10 years. Qing Yu laughed softly, and then continued to say, "There aren't any strange mutant spirit beasts here, but maybe some mutant plant species similar to the lunar enamored flowers in my herb garden, merely dangers that are present in a natural environment." Qing Bei nodded and said, "I'll walk in front to seek out a path, and you can also see whether the current level of my powers will be able to lead us through this 100 meters of bogland." In the previous wilderness training, because of unexpected changes, they had come out after just a few days. Moreover, what they encountered back then were mostly ferocious spirit beasts, and not natural dangers in the environment like this, where Qing Bei was feeling a little eager to test himself. Qing Yu raised an eyebrow and replied, "I'll watch the rear." Chapter 119. 1. Grand Trials. The center of the Lost Bog Forest was a wide and expansive clearing. Due to the circumstances where time was limited, they just erected a temporary arena stage. Surrounding it was an isolation barrier put up by several of the elders, with profound cultivation powers, which would activate once people enter the space. No one outside would be able to interfere, or for the contestants to come out before the end of a battle, or without one side being defeated. 10 seats were placed around the arena. The sect leader would not be attending the grand trials, as it had always been held by 5 of their highly respected elders, and the people holding the top 5 ranks among the top 100 chart. But as the top 5 ranked were highly laid-back people who usually did as they pleased, except for Su Liemo, who had shown his face a little bit more, and was well known to the others, no one knew what the other 4 of them looked like at all. The Faint Mist sect's sect leader was an enigmatic person himself, and he had never once attended such important events, highly mysterious. Maybe the top 5 ranked disciples were trying to emulate him, but they had won the right to be so arrogant and willful, and hence the sect leader had allowed them to have it their way. The Faint Mist sect had always given preferential treatment to highly skilled pugilists with immense powers. The grand trials were set to commence at 1/4 the Qin hour after daybreak, and quite a number of people were arriving in a constant stream before that. Most of them were the Faint Mist sect's disciples dressed in white uniforms, and a number of outer circle disciples wearing smoky green. If they were able to stand out and shine this time, They might be able to squeeze themselves into the inner circle ranks and win themselves better resources for their cultivation training. Tui tui tui. What bad luck. I almost could not get out. An angry voice spat and cursed, drawing the attention of quite a number of people. They saw a person where the high-quality cloth on his body had become untidily creased and stained with filthy muck, a terrible mess that was no different from a beggar. Someone asked with mirth in his voice, "Bro, what happened to you? Did you just crawl out from a mud pit?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That person spat out in disgust, and then said mournfully, "I don't want to talk about it. It had been smooth sailing for me the entire way through, but at the very last juncture, I did not expect to have a strange and mysterious vine suddenly tangle around my foot. If I had not reacted quickly enough to sever that vine, I would have been swallowed up by the bog." "Bro, that's rather lucky for you already. You were able to escape death at least." "That's right, luckily the heavens are looking out for me." It was clear that this wave of people were those that risked themselves coming in here, just to watch the show. Although they were in a somewhat decrepit state, they had succeeded in making their way through, and it was not known whether others behind them would be just as fortunate. Chapter 119. 2. Grand Trials. After about a cup of tea's time had passed, several more figures came walking in intermittent intervals, both male and females disciples in white uniforms with cloud patterns embroidered on the ends of their sleeves and lapels. The one among them attracting the most attention would definitely be the one and only female within the top 10 ranks, the most prodigious lady of the Green Wave Kingdom, Yenning Luo. This stunning beauty with an exceptionally elegant demeanor was born with a fortuitous mark between her brows, the ardent violet. It was once prophesied that the person who wins Yenning Luo's hand would definitely come to reign over a region and achieve great accomplishments, as this woman brings her spouse immense luck. Hence the number of admirers and suitors she had was always more than she could count. Not to mention those within the Green Wave Kingdom itself. About a third of all the men throughout the entire lands sought to win her heart. However, not only was she beautiful, she also possessed high and profound cultivation, and her icy cold personality made it even more difficult for anyone to get close. Although no one knew why she had called off the marriage engagement with the Green Wave Kingdom's crown prince that had been set since they were very young, but it had surely emboldened the people seeking to woo her. There were two other ladies dressed in the same white uniforms with cloud-patterned embroidery decorating their cuffs and lapels beside Yenning Luo with outstanding looks as well. Yenning Luo was 9th in ranking while the other two ladies had one ranked 12th and the other 14th. They were never far away from Yenning Luo, her loyal supporters. And not long after they reached, another group of people came walking in right after. They were Xianyuan Che and Lian Xiaojia, with several other inner disciples who came here together with them. They were chatting amongst themselves when someone suddenly whispered in a low voice, "Isn't that Yenning Luo over there?" That was when Xianyuan Che came to notice the few people in front. As he raised his head up to gaze over there, his eyes met Yenning Luo's, and the two of them immediately turned away from each other. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ever since the time the engagement was annulled back in the Imperial Palace, they had not met again. Back in the past while in the sect, they had also always avoided each other's eyes. With everyone all busy preparing for the grand trials over the recent period, and Yenning Luo having just come out from seclusion cultivation training, this was the first time that the two of them saw each other in the past few months. Yenning Luo's eyes darted away, and did not communicate with Xianyuan Che much. The petite-sized girl on the left with a pretty and graceful-looking face looked to be about the same age as Yenning Luo, and was also from a noble family. Her name was just as gentle and poetic as her person, called Jiang Han. The tall and slim-figured one on the right was called Shen Jing, righteous and valiant-looking, but still exuded a certain gentle beauty. Her personality seemed to be easy and carefree, a kind of uninhibited candid nature, more becoming for a lady of the pugilist world. She looked at the group of people a short distance away, and she bumped her shoulder against Yenning Luo. "That Xianyuan Che, you really called off your engagement with him?" Yenning Luo replied. Chapter 119. 3. Grand Trials. I heard that he is the crown prince of a kingdom, from high aristocracy and possesses strong power. He's also ranked 7th in the sect's inner circle, above your own rank. Don't you like strong people like that? Are you only interested in those in the top 5 ranks? Shen Jing asked with amusement. Yan Ning Luo responded differently. It's just that our personalities cannot get along, and he is just as dissatisfied with the engagement as I am, so calling it off is good for both parties. Shen Jing shook her head. I really do not understand what both of you are thinking. Which among these two people wouldn't be considered a dragon or phoenix among men out throughout the lands, but their stubborn personalities were such that they refused to submit to each other in the slightest, neither willing to lower their heads, which caused them to split apart like this, which many thought to be such a great pity. The faint mist sect's disciples continued to stream in, and soon they have all arrived, with a great number of them all standing in a ring around the massive arena. Adding all the inner and outer faint mist sect disciples together, they would number as many as 500 or 600, so not all of them had come here. Before the trials were held, the sect had already gone through a round of preliminary filtration internally, and because a group of external savages would be coming to challenge them, the winners of this grand trials would have to stand against the enemy. Once news of that was released, many people had felt their blood boil, and they all became eager to teach the enemy a good lesson. But after they came to know that the savages coming were the brutal and ferocious Crimson Land's 8 demons, who killed people without mercy, a good number of them were immediately overcome with terror. One of the disciples standing guard that day who was rescued somehow ran out accidentally in a mad run, mindlessly screaming incessantly as he covered his head with his arms. Don't kill me, don't kill me, which inflicted a greater amount of pressure on everyone. So choosing to give up might just allow them to still have a chance to live, as if they were really pitted against the Crimson Land's 8 demons. They would not even die with their bodies intact. Who would dare to take such a risk? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU in an instant. The number of people who chose to give up on the trials grew to as many as 200 people. Towards such cowardly action, the faint mist sect immediately wiped their memories and threw them out of the sect, and they were to never set foot into the sect ever again. For them to lose all memory that pertained to their time in the faint mist sect, that was seen to be a very cruel punishment. On the foremost row of seats, the 5 elders had already arrived and were seated, but the top 5 ranked disciples, who were supposed to be the people in charge of the trials, were nowhere to be seen. There were already some disciples starting to mutter in soft whispers in the crowd. Those guys in the top 5 are really as haughty and arrogant as they have always been. They are putting on such airs, thinking they are greater than the elders themselves. It isn't just a day or two that they have been like this. Aren't you used to it yet? Another person quipped. Chapter 119. 4. Grand Trials. I have been here in the faint mist sect for 3 years, and I have never seen them show up before. The rumors about them are almost legendary, and they might very well be only just that, rumors. Isn't it said that Suliemo will come this time? At least one of them will appear here today, right? The elders glanced at each other before their gazes all turned to look upon the youngest man among them in the middle. In comparison to the few of them who were elders with wizened faces with their white beards and hair, the young man among them looked to be only about 30 years of age, his face elegant and calm, seeming possessing a kind of steady wisdom that belied his age. But besides the sect leader and the 12 elders, few knew that this man was not only a high-level pugilist, but also a clairvoyant who was able to augur blessings and calamities. Elder Yen, I think those few won't be coming. Why not we begin first? Otherwise, when the Crimson Land's 8 demons come, we will not be able to hold the trials at all. A middle-aged man at the side said sternly. Elder Yen was deep in thought for a moment before he lifted his head up to say, "Then let's start." The duels for the inner disciples were all arranged in the later matches, and the outer disciples would fight in the initial duels, where 50 would advance from 100. The arena was enormous and 20 matches could be held at one time, so they would be able to see some results very quickly. The day for the recruitment of new disciples was about to arrive, and if they wanted to remain here and not get kicked out, they would have to give this trials everything they have, and not be soft-hearted to give any consideration to their sense of friendship and fellowship. It was probably because their desire to stay was so strong that they actually discovered that there were some disciples among the outer circle who possessed quite good skills. I heard that all the previous internal grand trials were held within the sect premises, so it makes me wonder why it is held here in this place this time. A gently handsome-looking youth in a royal blue brocade robe said in a low voice. This person was Qing Bei, who had just reached after coming out from the boggy marsh. He had accidentally stepped into several bog pits on his way in, but his quick reactions had enabled him to dodge them jumping onto safe ground, so he was still relatively clean. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yu came walking over from the side and she said softly, I heard that it's because several people with maniacal skills issued a challenge to the Faint Mist sect, and they had no choice but to do this in order to prevent that gang of people from going into the sect grounds. They were called the Crimson Land's 8 Demons? Yep, that's what they're called. Where did you hear that from? Qing Bei asked in bewilderment. Qing Yu then signaled with her chin and said, Those few female disciples were discussing it, and I went over there to ask. They told me about it. Qing Bei followed her gaze to look, and saw several hot and eager eyes peering their way with intense interest and passion. This girl here is using her sex appeal to go gather information again. Chapter 120. 1. The Faint Mist sect's insider secrets at that moment. The duels where 50 out of 100 will advance already saw some results, and besides the 100 disciples in the inner circle, there were half the numbers of outer disciples left from the initial 300. Qing Yu's long upslanted phoenix-like eyes were thoughtful. Why do I feel that the speed they are carrying this out seems a little too fast? Are they in such a rush? Seeing her puzzled face, Qing Bei leaned in close and whispered, The grand trials this time round is actually just merely camouflage. Their real intention is to rid themselves of those who have remained in the sect for too long, and their powers are just barely adequate. The Faint Mist sect is after all the leader of the 3 great sects, and if they get dragged down by these disciples, it might affect the reputation of the entire sect, allowing the Limitless sect, or the Carefree Valley, to take their place. Although the Faint Mist sect has greater numbers than the other 2 sects, but a whole 1/3 of their numbers are not up to the mark. Qing Yu laughed out loud. Isn't it said that the Faint Mist sect's admission trials are very strict? How did such people manage to get in? Her tone of voice was filled with undisguised ridicule. If that was truly the case, then she might be better off not being accepted into the sect. A sect filled with a bunch of parasites, she really wasn't interested. Once she spoke those words out loud, Qing Bei immediately looked at her in wonder. He then remembered that she had come from a different world, and it was normal that she did not understand things in the constellation lands all that well. The previous Faint Mist sect leader died by assassination more than 10 years ago. The current sect leader took over only when he was 30, and there is a group of people who have been stirring up an unhealthy atmosphere inside the sect all the way back from the time when the previous sect leader was still around, a great number of avaricious and devious foxes who pulled people in with an eye closed to their inadequacies. Qing Bei's voice was extremely soft, but most unfortunately, someone at the side who was not too far away from him had extremely good hearing. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was a tall and slim young man who looked to be about 20 years of age, wearing a long black suit, standing there with his arms crossed over his sword. A ribbon that same color as his band that bound his hair high up at the top of his head. His face good-looking, his straight sword-like brows striking as a playful and frivolous smile played across his lips, looking startling good. Although he stood hidden among the sea of people in the crowd, he still unconsciously drew one's curious gaze onto him. Besides being exceptionally good-looking, the aura the man exuded was steady as a rock. The sword clasped within his crossed arms did not look ordinary, but just rather old. It wasn't all that attractive on the outside, but one was able to sense a powerful aura, even when it was in its sheath. An oppressive feeling that was so strong people with low levels of cultivation were unable to go close to him. Hence, the area surrounding him was exceptionally vacant, and a lot less squeezy than all the other areas. But unexpectedly, at just a few short steps distance away from him, two seemingly young squirts stood completely unaffected, and were even happily discussing about the faint mist sect's insider secrets. Chapter 120. 2. The faint mist sect's insider secrets. The arc at the edges of the man's lips deepened slightly. Interesting, that's really interesting. How did this little brat come to know about such secret matters within the faint mist sect? It must be known that these matters are things that many of the inner disciples would not have even heard about before. So where had this youth heard this gossip from? On the other side, Qingbei was still talking excitedly, and did not notice that a man a short distance away from him was listening intently. It is said that the current sect leader is known to be a smiling tiger, who makes his moves with brilliant execution, killing his enemies without drawing any blood. He was just a distant nephew of the previous sect leader, and after his uncle died, the sect fell into scattered disarray and chaotic turmoil, very nearly becoming absorbed into the other two great sections. But as a kid who was only 17 or 18 years old, he stood forth against all odds, and pushed back the covetous reach of the other two great sects, and even assumed the position of sect leader. No one in the faint mist sect did not defer to him, as anyone who had ill and crooked intentions were struck with terror by his mind-blowing ways. Hearing him out, Qing Yu's face was one of intrigue, her eyes shining as she looked his face up and down, almost like she was expecting a flower to bloom. The youth was suddenly embarrassed. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Qing Yu shook her head, and then clicked her tongue. "I am just curious whether there is anything that you do not know. You can even sputter on so much about old and ancient events that happened more than a decade ago like this, and you were only 2 or 3 years old when that happened. Could the kid be involved with some kind of mysterious secret organization behind everyone's back who specialize in collecting all kinds of unknown secrets pertaining to all these sects and clans in the pugilist world?" Hearing that, Qingbei then scratched his head sheepishly, and then lowered his voice further as he said, "I have not really gone to investigate into these things, but strangely, whenever I go think about it, all the information will just appear in my mind." He had not even managed to finish his sentence when Qing Yu clamped her hand over his mouth, and then said to him telepathically, "You fool! There are all kinds of skilled experts all around here, and you dare to say something like that so carelessly. If any of them hears you, they will capture you and crack that brain of yours open to see what is actually inside." Qingbei felt a chill run up his spine from that vehement and vicious expression on Qing Yu's face. He then blinked his clear eyes innocently to indicate he understood, and that he would not speak so carelessly anymore. Qing Yu then let go of him. She had not known that the kid possessed such a peculiar ability over the years. When one sought to know about something, information would just appear in his mind without having to investigate at all. That was like a super divine artifact that gave them an incredible cheat. Up on the arena, the matches for the inner disciples have already begun, and because the top 20 were not due to compete yet, the remaining 80 dueled one-on-one, where the winning side would remain. And all those disciples from the outer circle who failed and were eliminated had already been sent out of the boggy marshlands with their memories wiped away after being thrown out of the faint mist sect. Many of them were parasitic worms who had been around since the previous sect leader's time, and there were some who possessed just average talent that were similarly thrown out because they had reached the peak of their potential. The arc at the edges of the man's lips deepened slightly. "Interesting, that's really interesting. How did this little brat come to know about such secret matters within the faint mist sect? It must be known that these matters are things that many of the inner disciples would not have even heard about before. So where had this youth heard this gossip from?" On the other side, Qingbei was still talking excitedly, and did not notice that a man a short distance away from him was listening intently. It is said that the current sect leader is known to be a smiling tiger, who makes his moves with brilliant execution, killing his enemies without drawing any blood. He was just a distant nephew of the previous sect leader, and after his uncle died, the sect fell into scattered disarray and chaotic turmoil, very nearly becoming absorbed into the other two great sections. But as a kid who was only 17 or 18 years old, he stood forth against all odds and pushed back the covetous reach of the other two great sects, and even assumed the position of sect leader. No one in the Faint Mist sect did not defer to him, as anyone who had ill and crooked intentions were struck with terror by his mind-blowing ways. Hearing him out, Qing Yu's face was one of intrigue, her eyes shining as she looked his face up and down, almost like she was expecting a flower to bloom. The youth was suddenly embarrassed. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Qing Yu shook her head and then clicked her tongue. "I am just curious whether there is anything that you do not know. You can even sputter on so much about old and ancient events that happened more than a decade ago like this. And you were only 2 or 3 years old when that happened. Could the kid be involved with some kind of mysterious secret organization behind everyone's back who specialize in collecting all kinds of unknown secrets pertaining to all these sects and clans in the pugilist world?" Hearing that, Qing Bei then scratched his head sheepishly and then lowered his voice further as he said, "I have not really gone to investigate into these things, but strangely, whenever I go think about it, all the information will just appear in my mind. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." He had not even managed to finish his sentence when Qing Yu clamped her hand over his mouth and then said to him telepathically, "You fool! There are all kinds of skilled experts all around here, and you dare to say something like that so carelessly. If any of them hears you, they will capture you and crack that brain of yours open to see what is actually inside." Qing Bei felt a chill run up his spine from that vehement and vicious expression on Qing Yu's face. He then blinked his clear eyes innocently to indicate he understood, and that he would not speak so carelessly anymore. Qing Yu then let go of him. She had not known that the kid possessed such a peculiar ability over the years. When one sought to know about something, information would just appear in his mind without having to investigate at all. That was like a super divine artifact that gave them an incredible cheat. Up on the arena, the matches for the inner disciples have already begun, and because the top 20 were not due to compete yet, the remaining 80 dueled one-on-one, where the winning side would remain. And all those disciples from the outer circle who failed and were eliminated had already been sent out of the boggy marshlands with their memories wiped away after being thrown out of the Faint Mist sect. Many of them were parasitic worms who had been around since the previous sect leader's time, and there were some who possessed just average talent that were similarly thrown out because they had reached the peak of their potential. Chapter 123. The Faint Mist Sect's Insider Secrets. The Faint Mist Sect's number of disciples were over 1,000 people many years ago, and based on the current sect leader's way of doing things, it was thought that their numbers would become less and less, keeping only the outstanding elites. Rong-yi, are the Crimson Land's 8 demons not coming anymore? The sea hour is almost over, and it will be midday soon. The person who said that was the 20th ranked Jin Zehao. He was the son of an elder among the sect's 12 elders, and although his father did not exactly see eye to eye with Rong-yi, he was on rather close terms with Rong-yi. Jin Zehao's personality was generous and jovial, and he had always felt that although Rong-yi was behind him in their rankings, the young man was too deep for him to fathom. He thought that Rong-yi had a very quick mind and was smarter than a lot of people. Hence he always looked up to Rong-yi so much that it bordered almost to the point of blind worship. Rong-yi had been standing at the perimeter of the arena, his gaze surveying the surroundings. Being interrupted like that, he knitted up his brows and said in a deep voice, "Don't let down your guard. Maybe when we were all not paying attention, the Crimson Land's 8 demons had already slipped themselves among the crowd." Jin Zehao blinked his eyes in surprise. Would they really do that? Isn't it said that the Crimson Land's 8 demons are highly arrogant in their ways? Why would they remain quiet and not make a sound if they are already here? Those people have always been highly unpredictable and unorthodox. Maybe they are secretly observing the trials to see if there is any trickery. Rong-yi replied softly. Jin Zehao nodded his head in understanding and replied, "Rong-yi, I think that is highly possible as your predictions are seldom wrong." Those words just showed his unconditional and implicit trust in the young man. The initially bustling crowd had unknowingly lessened by quite a lot with the eliminated Faint Mist sect disciples removed. Besides the top 20, there were less than 30 inner disciples among the top 100 remaining, and the number of outer disciples was only about 100. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There was quite a great number of spectating pugilists in the crowd, and there was no lack of skilled experts among them. Most of them were here merely seeking to watch the fun despite the trouble it took to come here. And if all their disciples were to fall here today, the reputation of the Faint Mist sect would take a severe beating. Those people who had originally come here filled with eager anticipation were now finding it rather boring to watch, with some of them even starting to doubt whether this was truly the strength of the top sect throughout the lands, as they seemed to be just children playing house. Seated right up front, the faces of the elders were emotionless, as most of the people in the previous matches were ones with average talents, and they had remained in the Faint Mist sect for far too long, deemed to be unqualified to continue to be part of the sect. Hence, even with so many of them eliminated, none of the elders had shown much in the way of a reaction, until the matches for the inner sect disciples began. Jin Zhao was the first person drawn to go up onto the arena stage, and unfortunately, his opponent turned out to be Lian Xiaojia, who was a good number of ranks above him. Chapter 120. 4. The Faint Mist Sect's Insider Secrets, the 20th ranked against the 10th. Isn't the result already clear to see? It would definitely be a one-sided and bloody abuse. Jin Zhao gave Rongyi a bitter smile, and then stepped up onto the stage, accepting his fate, before he turned to look at Lian Xiaojia, who was looking highly relaxed in contrast. The internal trials had always only looked at who won and who lost, never involving things like brotherhood or friendship. Hence, though there wasn't any enmity between the two of them, Lian Xiaojia was not about to show any mercy. The moment he stepped up onto the stage, a fiery red light flared out from his body, to the extent that those closer to the stage could see that there were tiny flames burning over his skin. The scorching heat from the burning fire did not hurt him in the slightest, and it could be seen with just one look that he was an expert who had cultivated his fire element to its peak, controlling the flames with great ease. Lian Xiaojia's martial arts was just like his personality, wild and unyielding, highly domineering. He threw out punches with both his fists, and the flames formed into two ferocious tigers that leapt straight towards Jin Zhao, their jaws wide open as they sought to tear him to shreds. Seeing that Jin Zhao quickly formed a seal with his hands, and a large blue barrier formed up before him, to ward off the tiger's ferocious attack. But the barrier he put up was shattered by the force from the ferocious tigers. Whoa! Lian Xiaojia is really strong. When those two tigers pounced just now, I almost thought that Jin Zhao would be bitten to death by them. They looked so lifelike, and who would have thought that they were formed from Lian Xiaojia's powers? Jin Zhao is doing too badly as well. With that big a difference in their powers, he was actually able to dodge Lian Xiaojia's attack. It looks like he is made of rather stern stuff as well. As expected, the matches between the top 20 are so much more interesting. What a farce all those fights before had turned out to be. It really sullied my eyes watched them. You couldn't be more right about that. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Voices raised in debate ensued below the arena stage, and Qingyu looked at the scene with her brows furrowed together, before she shook her head as she said, "Too slow." What is too slow? Are you saying that the defensive actions were too slow? Qingbei asked when he heard his sister's voice and then continued on to say, their cultivation levels differ by just too much, and that should not be anything to be surprised about. The speed of the attack was too slow. Qingyu said slowly, although his grasp of the fire element is rather good, but he is still lacking a little in the control of the heat. He possesses just brute strength, but isn't flexible enough to implement it into his martial arts. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for his opponent to avoid that strike just now, and be severely wounded. The black-robed man standing a short distance away from them had been paying close attention to these two young tykes, and upon hearing that incisive appraisal, his eyes shone even brighter. His curiosity got the better of him, and he could not help but to open his mouth and ask, "Hey, young one. You have quite a sharp pair of eyes there. It looks like you are actually an expert hiding a lot more skills than you reveal." Chapter 121. 1. Evil mastermind behind the scenes. He spoke very suddenly, and Qing Bei immediately turned his head to look at him warily, his eyes dark. Has this guy been eavesdropping on them all this while? A corner of Qing Yu's mouth tugged, and she turned to glance at the man with an almost imperceptible smile, her eyebrows slightly raised over her devilishly mesmerizing eyes, which stunned the man subtly a moment. Her voice that was highly pleasing to the ears then rang out. You're too kind. But for the young master to secretly listen in on so many secrets we were talking about without making a sound, that isn't really a right thing to do. Haven't you ever heard that it is discourteous for a gentleman to listen in on words not meant for his ears? This kid's got a sharp tongue, just as powerful as that demon-spawned face that could bring calamity onto a kingdom and disaster upon its population. The black-robed man lamented inwardly. There's no need to get so worked up, my little brother. I merely want to make friends with both of you, the man said with a laugh. It was only when the two people turned around that he discovered that the two of them looked very much alike, and it seemed like they were undoubtedly siblings. Make friends. Qing Yu's eyebrow arched up and then continued to say slowly. I wonder if the young master has heard of a saying? What? The black-robed man asked, but for some unknown reason, he subconsciously knew that it would not be anything nice. And it was just as he expected. An unsolicited shower of attention is bound to be hiding evil intentions. Qing Yu responded with a highly disarming look on her face. The black-robed man was speechless. This was the first time he had encountered something so unexpected, that he could actually be thought to be a person with nefarious intentions. If the others came to know about this, they would surely laugh and scorn him to death. But he was not ready to give up, and he recollected himself. Little brother, I cannot make myself agree with you words. Look at me. Do I look like someone who would harbor such impure thoughts? He is a person who looks so debonair and handsome. One can see that he is a good person with just one look. Qing Yu was silent for a moment, and there was a rather complicated look in her eyes, like she was looking at some creature with an extremely low intellect. It was a good while before she came to open her mouth to say in a dismissive tone. There is another saying that goes like this. A book cannot be judged by its cover. Will a felon write the words, I am a felon, on his face? She really felt that there was something really wrong with this person's brain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You hearing that? The black-robed man's handsome face creased up in melancholy. He had never thought that he would ever be seen as a bad person before. His face has, I am a good person, written all over it, you know? This little brat really does not do the great-looking flesh shell. He has been blessed with any justice. Why is he so unlikable? Seeing that the man looked like he was about to burst into tears with indignation, Qing Yu's mesmerizing eyes flashed with a glimmer of light, and the corners of her mouth raised up slightly a notch before she went on to say, The young master must not take offense, as I am merely just joking. Is there anyone who jokes around like this? The man nearly choked, and he only managed to calm himself after a struggle. Fortunately, he is a big-hearted guy, and will not take something like this to heart. He then looked at Qing Yu with a serious look and then said, Then friends. Chapter 121. 2. Evil mastermind. Behind the scenes it could be seen that he was being quite persistent. And smart as he was naturally able to see that between these two runts, the devil's spawn with looks that attracts people to him like bees to honey was the decision-maker, and the other gentle and handsome-looking youth would just subconsciously follow suit. That much was clear to see. When his words came out this time, the other party did not reject him this time, but agreed to it with a smile. This suddenly made him start to think whether the young lad had been toying with all along. Although Qing Bei did not really understand why Qing Yu would agree to be friends with the man so easily all of a sudden, but knowing that she always had a reason for every action she took, he did not raise any objection to it. The duel on the arena stage was still going on, and although Jin Zhehao was seemingly not a match for his opponent, he still had not given up, and was still struggling valiantly. If he were to give up just like that, then his father as one of the sect's 12 elders would lose face, and so he would definitely not admit defeat. Although Lian Xiaojie was filled with admiration for Jin Zhehao's tenacity, they were however standing in an arena, so he was not about to pull his punches, but was going all out. seeking to send Jin Zhe Hao flying out over the stage with a powerful strike that would then determine the outcome of the battle. But just as he gathered up all the spirit energy in his body, the color of his face suddenly changed, and his entire person just froze there on the stage. That highly brilliant red flames over his body seemed to darken in an instant, to slowly turn into a dark maroon shade, a color that was like scab after blood had clotted and congealed. And upon Lian Xiaojie's face that originally shone with a healthy pallor, that shone with the color of wheat, it had suddenly turned a dark red as well. What is wrong with Lian Xiaojie? He does not look alright to me. Why am I feeling that his aura seems to be very chaotic? Has his spirit energies fallen into the way of devilry? Look, even the color of his face has changed. Has he been secretly practicing some devilish skills? Everyone in the surrounding crowd started debating furiously, and even the faces of a few elders immediately changed. The way Lian Xiaojie looked really seemed like he had fallen into the way of the devil from practicing some devilish skill. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Jin Zhe Hao had been fully prepared to lose the duel, and he had not expected that such a thing would suddenly occur. It was clear to see that Lian Xiaojie's aura right at that moment had weakened by quite a bit, and if Jin Zhe Hao were to strike right at that instant, he would definitely stand quite a good chance, where he might even be able to turn the situation around completely to snatch a win. But to strike a person when he's down was not a course of action befitting of a gentleman. Jin Zhe Hao furrowed up his brows, and he was feeling highly conflicted for a moment. Just as he was at a loss, his body suddenly started to move on its own accord, which struck a vicious palm strike right onto Lian Xiaojie's chest. The power of that strike was tens of times stronger than any of the attacks he had previously executed. It was as if Lian Xiaojie had been frozen in his spot, and he did not put up any resistance at all. That tall figure then flew like a kite with a broken string a few meters over the arena platform, where he then vomited out a mouthful of blood, his face immediately turning pale. Chapter 121. 3. Evil mastermind behind the scenes. And from what everyone else was seeing, Jin Zhe Hao did not only fail to stop himself, he even stretched his hand out to grab Lian Xiaojie, to pull him back onto the platform, and mercilessly slammed him down onto the ground, with so much power that Lian Xiaojie almost broke his rib. Terror filled Jin Zhe Hao's eyes. He had absolutely no idea what was happening at all. He could not control his body at all, and it still had not ceased its brutal actions, which was striking at Lian Xiaojie, till he vomited out blood repeatedly. When did Jin Zhe Hao become so strong? Isn't he going way overboard? Even if Lian Xiaojie had practiced some unorthodox skill, the guy is already incapable of any resistance. Why is Jin Zhe Hao so viciously cruel? He has already almost beaten Lian Xiaojie to an inch of his life left. You're right, could there be any private grievance between the two of them? Jin Zhe Hao was not aware of how everyone else saw what was happening in the arena. He only knew that he was unable to stop himself in the slightest. The maniacal bloodthirstiness in his heart merely grew more intense, as Lian Xiaojie grew weaker by the second. He yearned to be able to stop, but it felt as if he was a puppet on strings, under the control of others as his strikes grew heavier and heavier. Stop. Just stop already. I do not want to do this. I do not want this. Jin Zhe Hao's eyes turned bloodshot as he screamed out inside his heart in futility. He discovered that he was unable to utter a single word at that moment. But those words screamed in his mind. An incredibly evil and sinister laughter sounded within his consciousness. The sound reverberated in his eardrums, which caused his ears to ring with a drowning buzz. What are you afraid of? I am helping you here. So what if this person is stronger than you? I am letting you inflict insufferable torment upon him now. How is it? Isn't it exciting? Just strike harder, and you can kill him with your own 2 hands. You fiendish demon, who are you? Jin Zhe Hao roared in rage. You just want us to kill each other in order to satisfy your twisted sense of pleasure. You're just an absolute maniac. Ha 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 ha. You're quite an interesting little lad. Aren't the 8 demons of the easternmost edge the very epitome of brutal and vicious maniacs? Jin Zhe Hao's eyes flared wide open in shock. The Crimson Land's 8 demons. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When did they arrive here? Maybe right at this very moment they are. Where are they? Why isn't anyone aware of it at all? Jin Zeihao, have you lost your mind? You had better stop right this instant. Elder Jin shouted in infuriated rage as he stood up and rushed towards the arena platform. He had initially been worried that the kid would lose to Lian Xiaojie too badly, and he would be embarrassed, but in the end, Jin Zeihao had not only turned the tables, but had even decimated his opponent in a one-sided brutal beating. Elder Jin was more worried about Lian Xiaojie at that moment, as he looked like he was really almost barely breathing, and he would die if this continued on. But he really could not understand it. The brat Jin Zeihao had always seemed to be a slightly timid person. What could have come over him today to become so mercilessly vicious and brutal? Chapter 121. 4. Evil mastermind behind the scenes. A barrier had been set around the arena platform, and as long as neither one party admits defeat, even the elders present would not be able to stop the match. So Elder Jin could only shout out in a panic, Lian Xiaojie, just admit defeat. This is a totally unexpected turn of events that happened today, and I will definitely give you a satisfactory answer for it. This match will not count, so just concede now to get yourself treated. Lian Xiaojie was the Martial Kingdom's right-wing general's only son, and if he came to meet with any accident here in the Faint Mist sect, wouldn't the Martial Kingdom immediately mobilize their army to come flatten the Faint Mist sect's mountain? But little did he know that Lian Xiaojie wasn't refusing to concede. But he was not able to admit defeat at all. He was not able to move his body an inch, unable to block off the attack, but to just submit his body to suffer Jin Zeihao's powerful strikes that hammered wave after wave down on him, with pain wrecking every single bone in his body. Jin Zeihao, are you hearing a single word of what I have said? If you have any grievance to take up with him, settle it right and proper another day. If you continue to wound your opponent so maliciously, I will disqualify you from the trials completely. Elder Jin was fuming mad as his eyes flared wide with rage. However, the person up on the stage ignored him completely. Something's not right. Rongyi suddenly creased up his brows and said, Lian Xiaojie and Jin Zeihao look like they are being controlled. Rongyi, why would you think that? The person who asked this was the youngest among the elders in the sect, Elder Yan. Rongyi then answered in a low voice. Lian Xiaojie's powers have always been so much stronger than Jin Zeihao's, and even if Jin Zeihao had consumed some forbidden drug, his powers still wouldn't increase exponentially to a level that would allow him to completely thrash Lian Xiaojie like this. Moreover, Lian Xiaojie looks as if his cultivation has been sealed and is completely defenseless, being bashed up by Jin Zeihao like he's been tied up. Like the Faint Mist sect's young sect leader, Elder Yin trusted Rongyi, and he went on to ask softly when he heard that. You mean? Rongyi's eyes darkened, and his body moved in a flash that was too quick for the eye to see up onto the arena stage. His palm struck quickly towards Jin Zeihao, while his other hand moved faster. Then you can cover your ears, after a lightning strike to bring Lian Xiaojie off the platform. The entire sequence of events happened within just a breath's time. Everyone thought that their eyes was playing a trick on them. Not to mention just all the others. Even the 5 elders were staring with wide-eyed surprise. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That kid Rongyi possesses such terrifying power? That isolation barrier that took the combined strength of 5 elders to put up. He had actually gone in, and came out like it was nothing to him at all. And he is ranked 21st. How are the rankings even determined? The instant that Lian Xiaojie was brought off the arena stage, the pain he felt from his injuries seemed to magnify by several times. The excruciating and heart-rending pain causing him to scream out as blood trickled out from his eyes, ears, mouth and nose. Chapter 122. 1. Despicable sneak attack. Rongyi's gaze flashed with a sharp glint, and his face sank. Elder Jin, come look. Quick. Elder Jin was one of the very few elixir cultivators among the 12 elders, and he was also a teacher who taught elixir cultivation in the sect. Hearing that, he immediately rushed over to take a look, immediately sealing several of Lien Xiaojie's major acupoints to stem the incessant bleeding in many places on the disciple's body. But the bleeding had only stopped for a few short breaths' time, when Lien Xiaojie's chest started to swell up, his entire body looking as if it was being pumped with air, seeming like he was going to die when his body explodes in the very next moment. Rongyi's eyes widened. The current state of Lien Xiaojie's body was exactly like how the disciples guarding the sect entrance had died back then. He had not thought that the Crimson Land's 8 demons would be so treacherous and deceitful to hold the lives of 2 inner disciples who possessed profound cultivation powers in their hands before they had even showed themselves. Hold him upside down. Right in that instant of imminent peril, a voice sounded just beside his ears. Although soft, it was impossible to miss. Rongyi was startled a moment, and he subconsciously went ahead to do as the voice told him, grabbing at Lien Xiaojie's ankle to turn him upside down. The voice then sounded again. At the spot 3 inches below his chest, strike it with all your spirit power. Hearing those words, Rongyi could not help but crease up his brows. With his level of cultivation, not to mention using all his spirit power, Lien Xiaojie would not be able to even withstand half of it. Striking him with all his power will definitely rupture his internal organs. Is this voice trying to help him or harm him? Delay any further and even the golden deity of the highest heaven will not be able to save him. Upon hearing that, Rongyi no longer hesitated and his eyes glinted sharply. With powerful spirit energy gathered in his palm, he struck his palm right onto the spot. Rongyi, stop. Rongyi, what are you doing? Elder Jean was nearest to him, and when he saw that, he quickly stretched his hand out to stop Rongyi. Unfortunately, Rongyi moved too fast, and he was too late, unable to do anything but watch the strike land. A palm strike that was powerful enough to smash Lien Xiaojie into pulp. The very next second, everyone was stunned as they stared with unblinking wide eyes. What is that? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Lien Xiaojie was hanging upside down as the flow of his blood went in a reverse direction. His face turned a greenish purple. After he was struck by Rongyi, he did not die by having all his internal organs and meridians rupture and explode, but had instead opened his mouth wide to gag and vomit out a red unidentifiable ball wrapped in blood. Most of the Faint Mist sect's disciples were young, and they did not know what it was. But there were some among them who had seen more of the world, and were able to recognize what that thing was. A raucous clamor immediately broke out in an instant. The Eastern Edge's blazing blood spider. The black-robed man slowly spat those few words out from his mouth. The easiest time for them to slip inside a person's body is usually when a pugilist summons up their spirit power. They are reared being constantly fed with venomous creatures over many years, and the toxicity of their venom is lethal enough to completely clot the blood in the body of a large-sized adult in merely a cup of tea's time, resulting in death when their meridians and blood vessels rupture. You seem to know quite a lot. Qingbei raised his eyes up to look at the man and say. Chapter 122. 2. Despicable Sneak Attack. It's nothing. Having traversed the pugilist world for so many years, I've come to know a little of everything. Our little brother here knows quite a bit yourself. That inside information about the Faint Mist sect is something that many of the inner circle's disciples do not know anything about. The black-robed man said with a grin that showed his teeth, looking rather dashing as his eyes glimmered with a wise and crafty glint. Qingbei knitted up his brows and asked, "Who are you really?" The black-robed man was just about to say something when he suddenly heard someone in the crowd cry out in terror. "Everyone look! Look up there! Run!" The sky that had been a clear blue like it had been just washed had suddenly turned dark and ominous, where it looked like something was flying in a dense flock towards them from afar, the tiny black dots gradually growing bigger. The speed of those things were really fast, and they were already right before their eyes in a blink. The creatures had sharp mouths, and they looked highly malevolent. Large in size with a pair of strong hard wings that spanned more than a meter long, casting large shadows as they descended, blocking out the sky. These are blood-sucking bats. Qing Yu's eyes narrowed and she immediately cautioned, "Little Bei, do not let the bats touch your body." "Got it." Qingbei nodded his head and answered. The black-robed man came over closer to them when he saw that, and his face was excited as he asked, "Are you going to make your move? I just knew that there is a lot more in you than you are showing." Before he could even finish his words, something sharp brushed his face as it flew past, and a pitiful cry then sounded beside him. He turned to see a stout-looking bat fallen at his feet with its body still in a diving position, realizing that its sharp mouth would have pierced his back. The man's body stiffened, and he saw that two thin needles were stuck in the bat's red eyes, which burst into flames in the next instant, burning up the creature completely. What kind of a technique is that? It's so amazing. Qingyu threw him an expressionless glance and said, "Continue to be so distracted, and I will not save you again." So heartless. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The large cloud of bats swooped down to deliver vicious slaughter, and quite a number of disciples who were caught off guard died under their jaws. And on this side, Rong-yi and Elder Jean had their hands tied and were unable to leave. They had about 3 or 4 inner disciples guarding them, and Lian Xiaojie looked like his condition was in a very bad state. Although they were doing everything they could to suppress his blood vessels that were threatening to rupture, but the method of forcibly containing them could only be a temporary measure. The Crimson Land's 8 demons are just too despicable. To think that they would use such underhanded means, Rong-yi said through tightly clenched teeth, his eyes searching through the surroundings in a circle. He still did not know where they were hiding, and having them all exposed in the light, while the enemy hid in the darkness, would be highly disadvantageous to them. He had thought that since the group of them had left so cooperatively after reasoning with them, they would at least have some righteousness in them. He had been too careless. How could he have forgotten the infamy and notoriety that came with that name? The Crimson Land's 8 demons. Chapter 122. 3. Despicable sneak attack. Although there were many people there, but the blood-sucking bats was just too great in numbers, and they were really hard to kill. So many people gradually started to grow tired. Except for the inner disciples who were able to barely handle themselves, many of the disciples from the outer circle were already dead or wounded. TSK. How dull. Is that all that the Great Mist sect is capable of? Just a simple appetizer served, and you're all already unable to handle it. Truly undeserving of your reputation. And I have not even yet raised my hand. It was not known what kind of a perfect hiding place they were in that enabled them to remain unseen by everyone. The person who spoke was tall and slim as he leaned lazily against a tree, his strange pair of eyes that were like a snake's looking highly bored. Another man with an unidentifiable species of bird tattooed on his face then narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Among them, there are still a few highly skilled ones." "Where?" the snake-eyed man asked quizzically, following the direction the man was pointing at. The first person he saw was a black-robed man. The figure of the man was weaving nimbly among the blood-sucking bats, attacking him simultaneously, seemingly effortlessly, as he held a rather old-looking sword in his right hand that was still kept in its sheath. The force from a palm strike broke the wings of several bats, and with a wave of the unsheathed sword, robust energy burst out in an arc that drove back many of the bats surrounding him. All those creatures had not managed to hurt him at all, unable to even touch a corner of his clothes. It was clear to see that none of all these posed a threat to him. The eyes of the snake-eyed man lit up. This man was obviously a skilled swordsman, and it would be a shame to not see him unsheath that sword. He must definitely test that man's skills later. And not too far away from that black-robed man, a rather thin white-robed youth was even more interesting to see. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. All those blood-sucking bats were not attacking him. That was such an amazing sight to behold. Every time any bats came close to that youth, they would suddenly steer themselves far away from the youth on their own accord, looking like they were fearful of something. But the youth was not bothered by that strange phenomenon at all. Once any of the creatures came within a meter of him, the golden needles at his fingertips would be thrown out at blinding speed, and the blood-sucking bats struck by them would spontaneously ignite into flames, turning into ash in just a few breaths. What kind of sorcery is that? The snake-eyed man asked with shock-widened eyes, seemingly becoming more excited than he was when he saw the black-robed man earlier. Standing at the back, a tall and thin man with many kinds of flowery bugs tattooed on his face rubbed his chin, and then said in an affirmative tone, "That person must be an elixir cultivator of significant grade. Moreover, he knows how to counter the blood-sucking bats. On those golden needles, there is poison that is stronger than that inside the bodies of the blood-sucking bats. And when the two toxins meet, it causes spontaneous combustion. That's some great power there." Chapter 122. For a despicable sneak attack, he's really that good? The other few people beside him then asked. Each and every single one of them possess unmatchable skills, and they have roamed the pugilist world for many years, never having met a person who was able to counter them like this. That was what made them grow more wildly arrogant, and this was the first time that they had come across someone who could counter their strange powers like that. Hearing that, the man with bugs tattooed on his face then raised an eyebrow. "Would I lie to all of you? Don't forget that I am also an elixir cultivator. Although more like a witch doctor who specializes in poison. But no matter what, that has got to be considered to be linked to being an elixir cultivator in some way, right?" As that thought ran through his mind, a glint flashed in his eyes. "That kid is rather interesting. Wait till we annihilate all the rabble from the Faint Mist sect. I will then bring him back with us to study him deeply. Elder Yen, what should we do? Lian Xiaojie is growing weaker and weaker." Elder Jin's brows were so tightly knitted up it could crush a fly. Elder Yen had come over beside them after he drove back a great bunch of those blood-sucking bats. After he stretched his hand out to feel Lian Xiaojie's breathing, his face showed a rare moment of sternness. The blazing blood spider has damaged his internal organs too severely, and his blood is flowing in a reverse direction inside. We need to combine the powers of two high-grade elixir cultivators to help him soothe the chaotic state of his meridians. But he stopped before he had even finished the words he meant to say, for no other reason than the fact that besides Elder Jean here, there was no need to even talk about high-grade elixir cultivators. It would be hard to even find a single legitimate elixir cultivator among everyone here, but he had cast a divination for Lian Xiaojie before this, and it had clearly foretold that he would live a long life, not destined to die here today. "This is an blood-boosting elixir. Have him take this first." Because the few of them were all crouched down squatting on the ground, they all could only see the spotless and completely unspoiled white sleeve of the person before their eyes. Raising up their heads, the white-robed youth's countenance could not be seen all that clearly against the light behind him, but his exquisite facial features were still so beautiful that it made them hold their breaths at the sight. Especially the mesmerizingly beautiful phoenix-like eyes that were sparkling with a smile, so unbelievably enchanting. It was a kind of beauty that transcended the standards between male and female, of indeterminable gender. Even an old man like Elder Jean, who had lived past half his life, could not help but be dazzled on this rare occasion. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After being stunned for a short moment, Rongyi quickly snapped back to his senses. But his attention was focused more on the youth's voice, clear and soothing, exactly like the voice of the person who had spoken to him telepathically earlier. He stood up instinctively and clasped his hand over his fist before he said, "Thank you for the young master's words that helped me just now." Qingyu was a little surprised that the man was so astute. She then laughed softly and replied, "It was no trouble. Nothing to it. Feed this to him, and his meridians will not surge so strongly anymore." The faces of Elder Jean and Elder Yen were looking highly confused, not knowing what kind of charades those two people were playing. Chapter 123. 1. Resolving the crisis. Hearing that, Rongyi took the porcelain bottle from the youth's hand, and he accidentally touched the youth's fingers. They were cold, unlike any normal person's temperature. Towards that, he was slightly startled, but he did not think too much into it. After Lian Xiaojie took the elixir, his condition stabilized, and the greenish-purple pallor of his face was soothed quite a bit. Elder Jean was incredulous when he saw that, and he got up with his face in shock to stare at the unbelievably beautiful-looking youth. "This young master here, where did you get this elixir from? It has such miraculous effects." It was clear to see that Elder Jean did not think anything of the situation, but that the youth must have had a fortuitous encounter that gave him possession of that elixir, as the youth looked to be merely in his teens, and there wasn't much room for him to think otherwise. Qingyu curled up his ends of her lips to reveal a stunning smile, and with a soft, gentle voice she said, "Against my humble ineptitude, I am an elixir cultivator myself." Hearing that, Elder Jin's eyes flared wide, round as saucers, stunned into immobility for an instant. But he quickly recovered and asked, "What a young and promising young master. I wonder where you are receiving tutelage? I would assume that this elixir must have come out from under your master's hands." He was eager to get an answer, as he really just could not believe that the youth could possibly be that capable. But alas, he was set to be disappointed. From no sect nor clan, but has been interested in medicine since a young age, so I have come to know a thing or two about it. Qingyu said with great humility, "Then I wonder, would you be interested in the Faint Mist sect at all?" The moment those words came out, not only Elder Yin was stunned, but even Rong-yi was a little startled as well. Among the Faint Mist sect's 12 elders, Elder Jean could be said to be the one with the most explosive temperament, his standards the loftiest, where even his own son was deemed not good enough to catch his attention. Throughout the entire sect, only the top 5 were able to see a more amicable side of him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was not because he was proud and arrogant. Elder Jean was not only an elixir cultivator, but he also held the badge of approval as an outstanding elixir cultivator from the Elixir Cultivator Guild in the Whitefen lands. So he definitely had the right to be so haughty. Although Rong-yi always squabbled with him all the time, but deep down inside, he greatly respected this elderly senior of his. To think this youth that he was meeting for the first time could actually immediately catch his attention, that was really such a rare sight to see. The sudden invitation extended to her caused Qingyu to arch up an eyebrow. Her voice was slightly amused as she came to respond after a moment's thought. "To be honest to the senior, I had initially been very interested in the Faint Mist sect. But after what I saw here today, the Faint Mist sect's standards seem to differ too much against what I have heard about." Those words were put across with great tact, but they also expressed what she meant to say very clearly. Elder Jean laughed out loudly. "Of course the standard of the Faint Mist sect is much more than what you have seen. To tell you the truth, most of the Faint Mist sect's most skilled experts are outside undertaking rigorous training. Hence the purpose of this grand trials we are holding is to eliminate the disciples with weak powers among us on one hand. And as you can see for yourself, it is to deal with the Crimson Land's 8 demons who have come with unfriendly intentions." Chapter 123. 2. Resolving the crisis. Qingyu's gaze flashed with a glint, before she then asked tartly, "Does that mean the ranks of the highly skilled disciples on the chart are arranged any way you please? You can't say that the rankings are ordered as we like. It's just that quite a number of our disciples have rather odd and eccentric personalities, and they are not really all that interested towards the ranking. So many of them did not take part in the trials. Hence, besides the top 5 whose powers truly befit their ranks, most of the positions below that have been more or less diluted somewhat." The gentle and elegant-looking Elder Yen had joined in to say with a laugh, and his gaze had inadvertently turned to glance at Rong-yi, one of such odd and eccentric disciples. Rong-yi was helplessly speechless. Qingyu nodded in understanding. It was just as what Qing Bei had said earlier. The Faint Mist sect was really purging out bad blood. The bunch of them were here chatting as disciples on another side were almost about to vomit out blood from killing so many blood-sucking bats. But their numbers did not seem to be reducing in the least at all, but were instead attacking more and more ferociously. Even the disciples in the top 20 ranks were finding it a little taxing, and they were starting to show some signs of exhaustion. Yenming Luo had been scratched by the bats in a moment of carelessness, but fortunately, there wasn't any poison on their claws, or the result might be unthinkable. Hidden within the darkness, the Crimson Land's 8 demons watched the wretched state a group of people had fallen into, and their faces twisted up evilly, gloating at the disciples' misery. The eyes of the snake-eyed man then flashed, and several bright and colorful snakes immediately appeared around him, that leapt into the already chaotic fray, seeking to torment the disciples good and proper. Arg snakes! Watch out! These snakes are poisonous! Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU before they had come into the lost fog, because he was afraid that he would encounter rodents and snakes. Someone brought sulfur. When he saw the snakes, he quickly took out the sulfur and threw it at them. Snakes fear sulfur the most, and they would undoubtedly die. But he was too naive. Not only did those snakes not die when the sulfur touched them, they became even more excited. A red light shone from within their tiny inverted triangle eyes, and the snake bit on that person's ankle, the venom immediately flowing through its fangs straight into the person's body. The tall figure started twitching violently in spasms quickly thereafter, starting to foam at his mouth before he fell over and stopped breathing completely. Tisk moron. The snake-eyed man laughed mockingly. The little babies of mine have been eating sulfur from young, and they love sulfur the most. Snakes are born cold-blooded and vicious, and people just have an irrational fear towards them. Many people were thrown into a helpless panic upon seeing the thousands and thousands of snakes, more terrified than they were when they saw the blood-sucking bats. And just at that moment, the mellifluous sound of a flute wafted slowly over from a far-off distance, at times soothing, at times fevered, a powerful oppressive power imbued within, tinged with wintry cold murder. Chapter 123. 3. Resolving the crisis. All the violent and ruthless blood-sucking bats, and the venomous snakes froze in an instant, and they actually paused in their slaughter to sway to the melody of the flute, intoxicated by the music, unable to extricate themselves. What? The face of the snake-eyed man darkened. Why is this happening? The creatures are no longer in control. The sound of the flute continued to play, calm and unhurried, a hauntingly enchanting tune that flowed through one's heart like a soothing spring brook, relaxing one's heart completely. It worked on the bats and snakes as well, intoxicated and caught completely under its spell. What a powerful sound attack! Qingyu said suddenly. Bats and snakes are creatures with an acute sense of hearing. If one seeks to control such creatures, that is indeed the best way to do it. Rongyi's expression looked slightly taken aback, before he turned towards Elder Yin. Have they come back? Elder Yin thought about it a moment. There aren't that many pugilists skilled in sound attacks in the Constellation continent. That is probably the case. After a few short bars of that relaxing and soothing melody, the mellifluous flute suddenly altered its tempo, becoming urgent and oppressive, filled with darkness and sin, a blood-filled murderous requiem that wreaked pure agony upon the creatures who heard it. The ones who were weaker in resistance immediately wrapped their arms around their heads as they howled in pain, many of them even banging their heads hard on the ground, completely unaware of anything even when bright red blood flowed down their faces, seeking only to drive out through masochistic means that intensely overwhelming oppression that tore at their hearts. Countless blood-sucking bats cried out in an agonized screech, the powerful sound waves hurting everyone's eardrums, while the highly colorful snakes hissed endlessly before everything happened in the very next instant. Boom boom boom. Bam blam boom. Accompanying the ongoing sound of the playing flute, loud explosions with flying splatters of blood and flesh joined in, coming together to form into an enchanting symphony. All the disciples who had been lucky enough to have survived stood frozen in their spots in a foolish daze, not knowing what had happened. My babies! The snake-eyed man cried out in rage as his eyes turned red, looking like he was going to charge right out to fight the enemy with his very life. The man was a scorpion tattoo on his face standing behind him, then pulled him back, indicating that he should not lose his cool. The scene before their eyes was something that they had not thought they would ever see. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU even with several hundred of their disciples fighting for more than 2 hours had not done any good. Why have all the creatures suddenly died after hearing the sound of the playing flute? And it had happened completely without any warning signs. Unable to defend against it at all. Has a sage from somewhere come to help them? Qingyu was also highly curious about this expert skilled in sound attacks, But the sound of the flute had sounded like it came from a place very, very far away. It was controlled over such a long distance. Then that was truly some incredible power. Just as everyone was stunned in bewilderment, a slim figure approached in the distance, slowly appearing before everyone's eyes, treading over the sea of bat and snake corpses, in a set of unspoiled green clothes, untainted by even a single drop of blood. Chapter 123. 4. Resolving the crisis. That person wore a wide bamboo hat over his head. The way he looked, every inch a chivalrous pugilist of the martial world. First seen from a far distance of several hundred meters away, he then seemed to have closed the distance by a good bit in a blink, every single step he took covering a great distance. He had one hand behind his back, the other arm held horizontal across his waist, exquisite long slender fingers, with clearly defined joints gripped around a verdant and lovely bamboo flute. His posture highly elegant, a suave young master whose beauty would stir the world. Everyone was trying to guess at his identity, and even a few of the elders were not sure who this person was. Suddenly, a loud and boisterous voice rang out, filled with rage and indignation. Luolanji, didn't you say that you do not have time to come back? You dare fool the great lord? Everyone just looked at each other, with looks of utter bewilderment on their faces. Who is Luolanji? I don't think I have ever heard of that name before. Which expert in the pugilist world is called by that name? If I am not wrong, the third-ranked disciple of our faint mist sect seems to be called Luolanji. Then the other person who just spoke is... When the green-clothed man heard that voice, his steps came to a pause as he raised his hand to grip the edge of his bamboo hat to take it off. The stunning countenance then caused another round of surprised cries to break out. That person's looks was exactly like his elegant demeanor, as gently exquisite as finest jade, his facial features refined and good-looking, his eyes soft and serene, a captivating tear-shaped mole at the edge of his right eye. So beautiful it was heartbreaking to see. The thin light pink lips were slightly parted, a soft warm smile hanging on them. This is just too unfair. How can a person with such great skills still have such good looks? It was not known who among the people grumbled softly in complaint. The crowd then parted, and the person who shouted loudly was revealed. Dressed in an all-black robe, his sword-like brow striking, strong and handsome facial features, and his right hand still gripping an ancient-looking sword close to his body. Quite a number of people had noticed this person earlier, but as the scathing aura he exuded had been too intense, no one had dared to go close to him. So upon seeing him speak up now, many people immediately broke out into debate. He is acquainted with Luolanji. If I did not come, I fear even if everyone from the faint mist sect were dead, you still might not have made a single move. Luolanji's voice was mild, seemingly tinged with a hint of helplessness. As he said that, his feet had brought him over here. To the several elders here, it's been quite some time. How are things in the sect recently? Elder Mo, a white-bearded old man, then stroked his beard and sighed a long sigh. You brat, it's been longer than quite some time. The few of you have not come back to the sect for years. I had thought that all of you have forgotten to come back already. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Elder Mo is being too harsh. Luolanji replied with a laugh, and his eyes then turned behind him. Liemo, aren't you coming over to greet the elders? Everyone then turned their measuring gaze upon the black-robed man. Liemo? Su Liemo? The maniacal expert, who first set the record of 300 consecutive wins. He had arrived here early, and when all of them were in such a dangerous predicament just now, he had done absolutely nothing at all to help. Chapter 124. 1. Pull out the sword and you win. That had immediately caused many of the disciples to dislike Su Liemo. They had all been highly curious of, and had greatly worshipped the top 5 highly skilled experts, but never had they thought that this man would be so heartless to watch his fellow disciples die, and not lift a finger to help, which inadvertently bitterly disappointed many of them. Faced with so many pairs of eyes around looking at him strangely, Su Liemo twitched a corner of his mouth, and said a little scornfully, You must be joking. If this great lord here had really not done anything, Do you think all these useless trash would be able to last till now? Luo Lanji raised an eyebrow in surprise when he heard that. So he is saying that he secretly helped them. Laid back in comfy peace for so many years, if all of them are not put to the grindstone a little, any insolent dog or cat would be able to casually come up to our doors and challenge in future. By then, this great lord here will not even want to say that I am from the same sect as such useless trash, as that would be just too shameful. Luo Lanji was speechless. Couldn't that brat be a little more tactful at least? In that instant, the normally highly explosive Elder Jean actually did not blow his rage, but had instead knitted his brows together as he nodded in agreement. You are absolutely right. Our disciples in the Faint Mist sect have indeed enjoyed a much too peaceful and leisurely life. Having battled till now, all the outer circle disciples who survive today will be promoted into the inner circle, and disciples already in the inner circle shall gain the opportunity to go into the Heaven's Door Chambers for a day. The Heaven's Door Chambers was an important place in the Faint Mist sect. It contained records of many strange and odd incidents that occurred throughout the lands, and many secrets that people did not know about could also be found in there. Moreover, the spirit energy was robust in there, several times that of the outside world, with all kinds of mysterious and priceless superior grade martial arts and techniques in there. If one was able to pick up a technique or two, or just to cultivate for 3 to 5 days in there, they would surely be surprised by the unexpected results. Never had they thought that the sect would be so generous in order to grind and toughen them up. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The hidden Crimson Land's 8 demons were unable to hold themselves back any longer, and they finally stepped out to show themselves. All of them were tall and towering figures while dressed in red clothes with strange pictures tattooed over their faces. The face of the man with the snake tattoo on his face in front was dark and seemed to be on the verge of rage, but in the next second, he broke into a sinister-sounding laugh, and his voice was a little repressed as he said, "I've said that the Faint Mist sect is just a bunch of useless trash, but I had not thought that there are actually a few skilled pugilists among you. That is but natural, as the Eastern Edge is such a miserably poor and backward place after all. So I can undoubtedly understand that you do not know much about the world." Su Liemo said with his arms crossed before him, his tone scathingly emotionless. "TSK trash talking? Your great lord here has never backed down from it before." Puffed. Chapter 124. 2. Pull out the sword. And you when it was not known who among them was unable to stifle his laughter, and it elicited a chorus of soft laughter to break out. Luo Lanji shook his head helplessly. This fella here might be intolerably smug and arrogant, but he covers his shortcomings rather well, although he doesn't think much of all these disciples at all. But if they come to be bullied, he would not sit back and ignore it. It must be said that he's coyly adorable in this way. The snake-tattooed man recognized him. This was the skilled swordsman he had seen earlier. A strange sparkle shone in his eyes. "What use is it if talk is all you're good for? Why don't you and I battle it out a little? I would like to see whether your skill with the sword is as good as your glib tongue." Hearing that, Su Liemo raised an eyebrow looking rather amused. "You think you are good enough to have a taste of my sword skill? This great lord here has carried this sword for more than 10 years, and it has only been unsheathed 2 times. Are you sure this is worthy of it being unsheathed for the 3rd time? It's just an old battered sword, and you can brag so well to make it sound so sinister." The snake tattoo man said with an unimpressed expression, thinking nothing of it. "That sword merely looks a little peculiar, a little worn out, but there's nothing extraordinary about it." Su Liemo burst out laughing. "Old battered sword? Then why don't give it a try? If you are able to pull it out here today, you can do anything to all of us here as you deem fit. How about it?" "What?" Everyone cried out incredulously in shock. "Aren't you being too careless and flippant with your words here? Do you realize what is really at stake? Is he really that confident that the Crimson Land's 8 demons will not be able to pull his sword out? And if they managed to pull it out, wouldn't all of them be laying their lives here today?" The faces of a few elders immediately looked a little worried. Su Liemo was highly eccentric, and always does the unexpected against all reason. They were afraid that this fella's decision made in the heat of the moment might send the entire faint mist sect to its doom. Luo Longji smiled reassuringly and said in a soft voice, "There is no need for the elders to be worried. Liemo is not exaggerating. It is indeed true that no one else but him is able to pull that sword of his out from its sheath. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That sword hides profound mystery, and it is not a weapon that anyone is be able to wield." Su Liemo then extended the sword out towards the snake tattoo man, who was looking at him in contempt. Qingyu stood silently at the side in an inconspicuous place with the corners of her lips slightly raised, as she looked at the sword with interest. The entire sword was a dull dusty gray, looking like it had been buried in the ground for many years, and was just dug up. Besides that, it did not look any different from any other sword. The snake tattoo man just took it as Su Liemo was running his mouth off in boast when he heard those words, and he responded in challenge. "If I am able to pull this sword out here today, not only will everyone here today have to die, you will have to kneel before me and strike your head 3 times loudly on the ground to kowtow to me. How's that? Do you dare to take the bet?" Chapter 124. 3. Pull out the sword and you win. What is there to fear? If you are able to pull it out, not to just mention kowtowing, I will even call you grandfather. Su Liemo looked completely fearless, seemingly highly confident of himself. The snake tattoo man smiled sneeringly, and then gripped the sword's hilt. The moment he touched the sword, he immediately felt that something did not feel right. Before he could even react, he immediately heard Su Liemo's voice in the very next instant. "Grip firmly now." What? The moment the snake tattoo man had gripped the sword, the corners of Su Liemo's lips had shown a knowing smile. He then immediately released his hands from the sword, like he was giving the sword entirely to the snake tattoo man. Just as everyone was still feeling bewildered, they saw the face of the man change, before his entire body lurched violently forward to fall flat onto the ground, and let out a low groan. "Old ape, what happened to you?" The man with the scorpion tattoo on his face cried out in shock, and ran forward to help his comrade up. It was only when he came up front that he discovered the snake tattoo man's face had turned pale, his forehead beaded with cold sweat. The hand holding the sword was trapped on the ground as he squeezed out these few words through tightly clenched teeth. "This sword is too heavy." Hearing that, the scorpion tattoo man creased up his brows, and he gathered up a bit of strength to go pick up the sword on the ground. But against what he expected, that sword did not budge in the slightest. "You brat! You tricked us." Su Liemo arched up an eyebrow, his face innocent. "How did I trick you now? Didn't we agree that you just have to pull the sword out? How can the well-known Crimson Land's 8 demons be unable to even hold a sword up?" Everyone present turned to look at each other. It looks like that sword is really not as simple as it looks. To think that those demons are not able to even hold it up? The big brother among the Crimson Land's 8 demons was a man with a black wyvern tattooed on his face. He seemed to be the most steady and reserved one among them, and possessed the greatest amount of power. He came walking slowly over, and exerted some strength in his hand. His brows knitted up, and he suddenly picked the sword up. "I wonder whether it will still count if I pull out the sword." After all, it had been the snake tattoo man who made the bet earlier and not him. So he opened his mouth to ask. Everyone's heart unconsciously constricted at that moment. Su Liemo's face was unchanged from before as he lifted his chin up to say, "It will naturally still count." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Hearing that, the man's eyes darkened slightly, and he held the sword in one hand as he closed his other hand on the sword's hilt before he pulled at it mightily. There was no reaction. The man was a little puzzled, and he pulled at it with all his might again. It was as if the sword sheath was joined to the hilt, and it did not budge in the slightest at all. How is this possible? On the other side, the faint mist sex elders all had thoughtful expressions on their faces. Chapter 124. 4. Pull out the sword, and you. When Su Liemo had said that the sword had been unsheathed only twice in the past 10 over years, and it could still be remembered that one of those times was when the Faint Mist sect was undergoing a change in regime. The previous sect leader was killed by an ambush, and people from many sides were covetously eyeing that fat piece of meat, seeking to swallow it. The new sect leader was unable to do much facing the tide with his strength alone, and Su Liemo, who was one of the protectors at that time, had then used that very same unremarkable-looking sword to wash the entire Faint Mist sect's mountaintop in blood, terrorizing many into senseless fear. A youth who had merely been in his teens was more terrifying than Azura back then, and this was why he was deemed to have every right to be act so arrogant and willful. When the Crimson Land's 8 demons saw that even their big brother was unable to pull out the sword, one of them snorted derisively and said, "Isn't this sword of yours just a decorative piece that can't be pulled out in the first place?" Su Liemo laughed sneeringly and took back the sword, his eyes turning to look at the man who spoke as he said, "I would not mind proving it to you, but you will not be able to bear the consequences once the sword comes out of its sheath. You had better not complain that this great lord is bullying you when that happens." The man was so infuriated he really was almost going to strike Su Liemo, but was stopped by the man with the wyvern tattoo. The man's gaze rested on the old and battered-looking sword for a while before he looked up and said, "Our distinguished opponent holds high and profound cultivation, and we are shamefully inferior before such power. The Faint Mist sect is indeed the greatest sect throughout the lands, and is every bit true to its name." When those words that sound as good as admitting defeat came out from the man's mouth, not just the others among their 8, but even the people from the Faint Mist sect were stunned. What kind of a situation is this? They were already prepared to fight to their deaths, but the demons have now admitted defeat of their own accord. "Big brother, what are you even saying? What kind of a joke is this? We have not killed all these pieces of trash yet." The snake tattoo man was one of pure disbelief. The big brother that he had always admired, such a strong and powerful man. How could he do something so cowardly and weak? That was an insult to all of them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "You shut up." The man snapped in a deep voice before he turned towards Su Liemo, who had an indifferent and uncaring expression on his face. "Although we have caused the Faint Mist sect some affront this time, but we have also helped your sect to weed out those disciples without real strength and power. Hence I was just thinking whether we can call it even, and write off the entire episode altogether?" Everyone became even more bewildered. They have not even struck a single blow, and the Crimson Land's 8 demons are turning tail to run. The fact that they were unable to pull out Su Liemo's sword was really that terrifying? But of course, they were naturally unaware of the profound meaning behind that. Su Liemo had at that moment inadvertently become the Faint Mist sect's decision-maker in that situation, and when he heard those words, no surprise showed on his face in the slightest, like everything was just as he had expected, where he then said, "I wouldn't say that is impossible, but all of you will have to agree to this. From today onwards, if any of you happen to come across our Faint Mist sect's disciples, you must keep away from them and never cause them any affront. Your distinguished words shall be complied with." Chapter 125. 1. Highly popular youth. The Crimson Land's 8 demons had come quietly and left in silent defeat. Towards their own boss' cowardly actions, the few of them were feeling highly disgruntled. When had they ever turned away to run with their tails between their legs like this before? That was just so horribly humiliating. "Big brother, I really cannot continue to bottle it up inside anymore. Can you tell me why did you decide to lower your head before that bunch of trash back there? We could have killed them all." The snake tattoo man had an explosive temperament, and he finally could not hold in his words any longer. That was also what the several other guys wanted to ask, but as their big brother was one with profound insight, and always unfathomable, they thought that he must have his own reasons for doing that, and they had just kept their doubts to themselves. Hearing that, the eyes of the leader of the men with the wyvern tattooed on his face then darkened. "Do all of you think that when that man said if the sword is pulled out of its sheath, we will not be able to bear the consequences is really just a joke? Isn't it?" The snake tattoo man queried with an indifferent look on his face. "Although there is something strange about that sword, it is still merely a sword after all. With the level of cultivation we all possess, Is that not enough to withstand the powers of a single sword? There is a legend that speaks of a very long time, when the heavens split and the lands tore apart. A famed sword called the Night Abyss was born. When the sword is in its sheath, it just looks like any ordinary sword, old and battered, completely unremarkable. But once out of its sheath, its true colors would be unveiled, and it requires the blood sacrifice of 10,000 men for it to be appeased, sweeping up all who stand before its invincible power. It is a sword of ancient evil, and besides its owner, no one else will be able to pull it out of its sheath. Hearing his explanation, the several men showed expressions of surprise on their faces. Don't tell me. That brat's sword is the Night Abyss? But he looks to be only slightly over 20. How did he come to possess a sword like that? I touched it with my own hand, and I am sure I am not mistaken. The man's eyes narrowed. Even in its sheath, the sword was already so powerful. If it had really been unsheathed, I really cannot imagine how terrifying it would be. All our powers combined will not be able to withstand it, and moreover, besides this man and his sword, there were several other highly skilled experts whose powers are not inferior to any of us there. If we had clashed with them head-on, we will only create more casualties. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. But admitting defeat just like that is really such a loss of face to us. The snake tattoo man continued to lament indignantly. A man must be able to take things in his stride. The day will come when we'll be able to have it all paid back. There is no need to be impatient and rush things too much. The wyvern tattoo man said softly, the corners of his mouth curling up with a knowing smile. When the Crimson Land's 8 demons left the Lost Bogs, the faint mist sect's disciples could not help but break out in cheers. Never had they thought that they would be able to escape disaster today, and it was really most fortunate for them. If not for Suliemo, they might all have laid them lives here today. Everyone's eyes looked at him like he was a deity who descended from the heavens, filled with reverence and worship. Regardless of the fact that the guy was temperamental and unbearably arrogant, it did not stop the outpouring of admiration and respect from all of them. Chapter 125. 2. Highly popular youth. Quite a number of those busybodies who had come here just to watch the show had survived, and they were all proclaiming that they would be taking part in the Faint Mist sect's recruitment trials. With such a powerful entity in the sect, just by belonging in the same sect with him, would already be something they can brag to people about. Interesting. Qingyu arched up an eyebrow and looked at the youth with a highly excited look on his face beside her. Looked like this had not been a wasted trip. I had not thought that the man would actually turn out to be the Faint Mist sect's Suliemo, who set the record of 300 consecutive wins. Doesn't he look really young? Qingbei said rather emotionally. Qingyu could not help but laugh. He is older than you by quite a good number of years, and you are not too bad yourself now, you know? Why are you envying other people here like that? After saying that, she turned her eyes to measure the group of people conversing over there, and a glint flashed in her eyes. With all the things that happened to the Faint Mist sect here today, I think that a big change will come over the sect. I expect that the level of difficulty set for the admission trials in a month's time will be raised, and very few people will be able to make it through. With the number of disciples who died and the many who were thrown out, the Faint Mist sect had less than 300 members left. Those who remained were all the cream of the crop, and their recruitment for new blood would definitely require one to possess some outstanding traits, or it would be hard to pass the trials. Hearing that made Qingbei's face stiffen, and a glint of paranoia flashed in his clear eyes. I will definitely pass. Qingyu's eyebrow raised up slightly, seemingly a little surprised that he was so insistent on being accepted into the Faint Mist sect, before she then broke into a smile, feeling rather comforted. Ever since she had seen the regret and repression in the youth's eyes during the fire back then, hadn't she already known that he would surely grow up to be extraordinary in future? On the other side, Elder Jean was preaching earnestly with harsh but heartwarming words. Since you have come back, then you had better keep an eye on the upcoming recruitment trials. I reckon you would have a rather keen eye in picking out talent. Sulimo's eyes widened when he heard that. Why do I have to watch them? Isn't having you elders and teachers deciding on that good enough? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, without a few of the seniors among the top 5 coming out to hold the fort, how will all the little brats be able to feel the pressure? They will all be thinking that it is very easy to be accepted into the Faint Mist sect. Elder Jean went on to explain. Su Liemo burst out with a loud puff when he heard that. Elder, are you thinking that you will be able to uncover a few new disciples with potential like this great lord here? You've got to be joking. Moreover, if I am to really turn up there, I will just frighten them all away. He then glanced towards the gentle and refined-looking Luo Lanji and said, Isn't that fella here as well? Moreover, he is ranked above me, and he looks rather intimidating as well. It is better that a job like this be left in his more capable hands. After saying that, he then looked like he just remembered something, and he cast his gaze to search around with a slightly puzzled expression. Where did they go? He had just made friends with them, and they had just left without a word. Isn't that a little too much? Chapter 125. 3. Highly popular youth, what are you looking for? Elder Jean asked, having rarely seen the kid look so anxious. Sulimo's brows were knitted up. I had come to be acquainted with 2 young brats who seemed to possess quite good potential, and one of them was extremely perceptive. He glanced at the almost half-dead Lian Xiaojie lying on the ground. They could even point out this guy's inadequacies in his martial arts. Otherwise, even with Jin Zhe Chao being controlled by others, Jin Zhe Hao would still not be his match. Hearing that, Rong Yi, who had remained silent, suddenly opened his mouth. This person that senior is talking about, is he a very beautiful-looking youth? Huh, how did you know? Su Liemo asked in surprise. That kid did indeed look more beautiful than many ladies out there. Elder Jean was finally able to react. So it's that little young master you are talking about. He had even helped to bring Lian Xiaojie's condition under control earlier. Or he would be dead now, his body blown to pieces. Ugh! A weak groan suddenly sounded right at that moment. The few of them turned to look when they heard that, and they saw Lian Xiaojie open his eyes. Although his face was still rather pale, and he was still weak, he did look like his injuries were not entirely all that severe anymore. Wah! Elder Jin's expression was one of utter shock. He had come awake. Rongyi then said, It's the elixir taking effect. Seems like. He paused a moment, and his gaze turned to look at the flabbergasted Elder Jean. That youth is really a true elixir cultivator, and has attained a rather high grade. Elder Jin's son Jin Zhe Hao had not been interested in elixir cultivation ever since he was very young, and hence did not possess any skill in medicine, unable to inherit his father's legacy. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU as a teacher in the elixir cultivation department, Elder Jean had tens of disciples with outstanding skill in medicine, especially his favorite eldest disciple, Tanlin Rua, who was already a gold-level first-grade elixir cultivator, and he was only 20 years old this year. The white-robed youth had looked to be only 14 or 15, and it had seemed like his level and grade was quite a lot higher than Tanlin Rua. Classic example of truly fearful talent in the younger generation. After being momentarily stunned, Elder Jean suddenly snapped back to his senses, the expression on his face highly excited. We wouldn't know whether that youth will be taking part in the Faint Mist Sect's recruitment trials in a month's time, but if he turns up, by hook or by crook, I will definitely recruit him into my elixir cultivation department. Su Liemo laughed. Elder Jean, do not count your chickens before they are hatched. I can see that the kid possesses some great skills, so I would think that his level of cultivation would not be insignificant. This golden child will shine with blinding brilliance whether he goes, and he would undoubtedly have caught the eye of teachers from other places as well. This old man is determined to recruit that youth. Such gifted talent must definitely come to the elixir cultivation department in order to gain better growth and development. Elder Jean said determinedly in his old elderly voice. Since today's incident has come to an end, let's return to the Faint Mist sect and make a report of all that has happened. It is also time that we start to prepare for the recruitment trials as well. Chapter 125. 4. Highly popular youth. Everyone then departed one after another with Yen Ning Luo walking right at the back, her brows lightly creased up, with no one knowing what was going through her mind. Ning Luo, what's wrong? Is it because your wounds hurt? Jiang Yihan asked thoughtfully in concern when she saw the 2 bloody gashes on the young lady's arm. Yen Ning Luo shook her head, and it was a while before she replied in an emotionless voice. With such a great reduction in the number of disciples in the sect suddenly, it seems like there will be another round of trials after the recruitment of new disciples. And it is that second round of contest that will be the sect's true trials. The trials held today was clearly carried out with other hidden intentions. She was currently ranked 9th, and she was in a highly precarious position. Moreover, having caught a glimpse of the powers of 2 highly skilled experts, who were among the top 5 ranks, they were every bit as good as people claimed they were. With just his sword alone, Su Liemo had forced the Crimson Land's 8 demons to retreat, and Luo Longji had killed thousands and thousands of bats and snakes with nothing else but just a single sound attack. Such an unsurpassable feat was clearly nothing anyone would be able to sniff at. She had come to the Faint Mist sect to learn since she was 6 years old, and that was coincidentally the time that the sect was undergoing major changes. So she had spent 3 years as a disciple in the outer circle, before being promoted to become an inner disciple, a result from the several more times of sweat and hard work she had put in over the others. Because the person she had fallen in love with was so outstanding, she needed to make herself become strong enough so that she could stand by his side. Hence she urgently wanted to grow stronger, till she is able to stand tall within the Faint Mist sect. But after seeing Su Liemo and Luo Longji today, her haughty pride she had always held close seemed to have crumbled in an instant, as the disparity between them was really just too wide. Are you worried that there will be great changes in the chart rankings, and you might be squeezed out? Xinjing asked as she raised an eyebrow, seemingly able to guess what was worrying the girl. She then said with a laugh, "To think that you will be worried about this. Don't you realize that you are the only female within the top 10 ranks? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." She had absolute confidence in what she saw in Yen Ning Luo, as it was not easy for anyone to have been able to outshine so many others to enter within the top 10 ranks. Yen Ning Luo did not say anything else, as it was only natural that the 2 girls would not know what was really worrying her. And very soon, after the new recruits have been accepted into the sect, all the highly skilled disciples that had been traveling outside would return back to the sect. Hence, not to mention the top 10 ranks, even thinking of being among the top 20 would be as hard as reaching the skies. If this was the case for her, there was no need to say how much more precarious it was for others in the top 20. When the time comes, it would be very fortunate for them if their names could still remain within the top 100 ranking chart. Yen Ning Luo continued to walk right at the back of the group, and she could still hear Elder Jean and the others discussing about the exemplary medical skills of the flawlessly beautiful youth. Hearing Elder Jean singing such high praise, it seemed like he really admired the youth very much. Her eyes then darkened, without knowing why, although she had not noticed who that youth they were all talking about at all really was. But somehow, there was just this strange sense of familiarity in her heart. Little Monster had always been known to be the brainy, and hence his words were more convincing to many of them. Upon hearing that, the several people them did not come to object. But their actions have been becoming more frequent recently, so they do not know how much longer they would be able to hide it. And on another side in the Bright Moon Divine Palace, the floor was filled with people kneeling, their bodies trembling, not daring to even breathe too loudly. Behind the layers of mysterious and dreamy-looking curtain veils, the faint svelte silhouette of a woman leaning on a soft lounge could be seen. Although unable to get a peek of her countenance, it was not hard to determine that she was definitely a beautiful woman. The woman's soft, supple voice sounded out through the veils. "This lord here is not one who kill indiscriminately. I only need you to tell me who was the one who sneaked into the soul tablet chamber or else." Chapter 126. 2. Runaway slender onion white jade fingers stretched out from under her sleeves, red rouge polish on the nails adding a tinge of seductive beauty onto the hand, as the tips of the fingers slowly came close just beside the lips curved up in an exceptionally seductive smile. This lord here has just developed a new kind of curse, which originated from the very strongest single voodoo grub, which devoured thousands and thousands of its own species to evolve into an emperor voodoo grub. And it so happens that this lord is wondering how powerful it really is. My lord, spare me please. Your subordinate would never have the audacity to ever step inside the soul tablet chamber without any orders from you. My lord, please have it investigated thoroughly. Down below the pedestal, a black-robed woman, who looked slightly older, said with her head bowed. Is that so? So no one went in there? The woman laughed softly and then stood up, her gaze turned sharp and her voice exceptionally sinister as she said, This lord's patience is limited. Before this lord loses her temper, the person who went in there without my permission had better come forth and admit it, or all of you who have failed in guarding the place will die here today. My lord, I do not want to hear any more excuses. Do all of you know that there is a very important person locked in there? The woman sharply interrupted the person who was going to explain further. Throughout the entire Bright Moon Temple, besides this lord who is able to hold her down, any one of you who goes in there will just provide her with an opening to exploit with the slightest single misstep. And now, she has already escaped, and once she gathers up all of her spirit soul and regains every bit of her cultivation when she was at her prime, great catastrophe will befall the Bright Moon Temple. After she said all those words, the people kneeling before the raised pedestal were all overcome with shock. They had thought that the temple lord had flown into such a rage because someone had gone into the soul tablet chambers without authorization, and had not thought that there was such a huge secret hidden in there. No wonder they were all ordered to not go near that place, and anyone who defied that order was punishable by death. And just as the atmosphere in there grew heavy and oppressively silent, a white-robed figure among the kneeling figures suddenly stood up. Because she was wearing a hood, her countenance could not be seen clearly. It was only when she raised her head up that a small pretty-looking face was seen, her eyes clear, seemingly rather young and enchantingly lovely. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Just as everyone was puzzled with her actions, the girl suddenly started laughing before she opened her mouth to speak, with a gratingly raspy voice that did not suit one of her age. To think that the temple lord would ever come to show fear. The person behind the veils narrowed her eyes. Who are you? Me. The girl smiled enchantingly. Of course you would not recognize me. You have brought harm onto so many people that you cannot even recognize this face at all. She touched her own face gently. I used to have an extremely beautiful looking face and a highly enchanting voice. When I was 7, because you saw that I possessed outstanding looks, you threw me into a snake pit. A snake bit me on my neck, and I almost lost me life. For a whole year after that, I was unable to open my mouth to speak at all, till I was able to open my mouth. Because the nerves around my throat were damaged, I was no longer able to speak normally anymore. Chapter 126. 3. Run away. You must find this face very unfamiliar. Of course you do. Because the snake venom was too strong, my face rotted very severely, and the skin was of no use to me anymore. I endured the pain of cutting off my flesh, and had a change of a new face. I was the one who released the person in the soul tablet chamber, and there is no need to implicate others into this. I had known of your nefarious plot, and had hidden myself till today. The day I have waited so long for has finally come. She was such a good person, and she should not have to suffer such torment from a venomous woman like you. I will not be able to see the day that you fall, but I will wait for you in hell, waiting for you to suffer all kinds of pain and agony, and never be able to reincarnate for eternity. The girl spoke slowly till she finished, and her pretty face suddenly broke into a smile of relief and liberation. Blood suddenly flowed down from her clear and fair forehead, the bright grisly red slowly covering her whole face, a terrifying sight to behold. Her body slowly shrank and crumbled bit by bit, until she turned into a mere pool of blood, leaving behind nothing but a blood-soaked white robe. The grisly and bloody sight struck everyone deep in their hearts. A living person had just turned into a pool of blood, right before their very eyes. She was devoured from the inside by the grub in her body, and it had probably started from the moment her heart had risen with feelings of betrayal. But she had just suppressed it all this time. Hence, it was only just now that the curse consumed her completely. Throughout the Bright Moon Temple, every single person had a curse implanted in their bodies that would devour them once their hearts gave rise to feeling of betrayal. That was why cases of betrayal were seldom seen in the Bright Moon Temple. People treasured their lives, and hence no matter how temperamental or how many people the Temple Lord killed indiscriminately, and even when she did not see them as humans, there was nothing they could do except to endure it in silence. After all, if they were killed, no one would be there to protect their family members, who would have to suffer the bullying from others, and the Temple Lord would also never let them off. It was well known by everyone that the Bright Moon Divine Temple's Temple Lord was the greatest beauty in Cloud Heaven, and just a single glance at that flawless beauty would be enough to completely captivate a person. But only the people inside the Bright Moon Divine Temple knew that a heart as venomous as a scorpion lay beneath that beautiful countenance, and that human lives were not worth even a mention in her eyes, where she would sacrifice everything in order to achieve her objective. This position was actually not meant to be hers back then, but she had been just too vicious, so vicious that people were caught completely off guard. Her lust for power and position had blinded her completely, which drove her into committing all kinds of cruel and maniacal deeds. The western side of the Cloud Heaven continent was held by the barbarians. Their tribe had always remained aloof from the rest of the world, hidden in a secretive and mysterious place, unknown to the outside world. So no matter how hard the several different factions and powers fought each other, the barbarians remained uninvolved, never interfering at all. Can't wait for your next dose? Jump on the wagon early to access BBB, Black-Bellied Belle. Demon Lord. Bite the bait please on Misty Cloud Translations Patreon now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU click on Cloud's Ko-Fi page if you feel like buying Cloud a coffee. Thank you for the reading here. And you might also like to read The Phoenix Arises, and more coming up on Translator's site at Misty Cloud Translations. All contributions big and small are greatly appreciated to keep us going, and we at Misty Cloud Translations thank you. Hugs once again. Thank you for the support, and please continue to read other translated series on Misty Cloud Translations. Chapter 126. Run away because they were really just too mysterious, and no one had encountered them before. People told of many fantastic legends about them, with all kind of variations in those legends. They were said to have human faces, but possessed the bodies of beasts and hideously ugly, clumsy and simple of mind, brutes with explosive tempers, and were highly hostile to outsiders. No one knew whether there was any truth in all of that, but just one point. They were a tribe who were extremely hostile to outsiders, and it was forbidden for any of their members to marry outside their tribe, or they would be dealt with their tribe rules, and the person not from their tribe would be exterminated. For several hundred years, it was known that the barbarians were hidden deep within the Great Desert, but no one had gone in there before, because there were just too many rumors and legends about the place. Especially after the sun was sinking down in the evening, looking across the boundless expanse of sand, it felt as if there would be an incredibly immense beast lying in ambush in there with its mouth wide open, waiting to devour any lost traveler who wandered inside. The faint and indistinct figure drifted like a wandering spirit who had lost its way. The way forward was so long it did not seem to have an end. But she cannot stop. She must not stop. Her eyes started to see double, where everything seemed to be weaving in a blur. She did not know how long had passed when everything before her turned black, when she collapsed, unable to hold out any longer. The night breeze stirred up the fine sand, almost completely covering the small vague figure. There was only the very last few rays of the sun remaining, and night was right about to fall when hurried footsteps sounded. This is bad. I'm really so late today. I'll definitely get a sound scolding when we get back. It was a petite little girl, and she looked to be only about 10 years old with 2 little braids on her head, looking very adorable. As she trotted along, her nervous eyes suddenly seemed to have spotted something, and those large eyes blinked in puzzlement. What's that? Grandpa said that I must not be a busybody, as there are all kinds of dangers outside. But she was feeling highly curious. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Her feet shuffled slowly over closer bit by bit. That bundle of something is hidden under the sand, and it seems like it's a person. But why does it look so frail and weak? She stretched a small hand out to touch, and very nearly fell through the figure. She shrank back with a start and muttered to herself, "Is that a spirit soul? It will be really bad if it is eaten by a spirit beast." The small little person wrinkled up her nose as she recalled Grandpa's stern reminder. She then looked at the indistinct figure that was so weak it was almost invisible, and a torturous struggle rose up in her heart. After quite a long while, she then carefully pulled out a square box from inside her clothes and put the translucent figure slowly inside. She then sneakily looked all around her after that was done, thinking to herself that nobody should have seen her. She's so kind, so she couldn't possibly let this person's spirit be eaten up by spirit beasts. Chapter 127. 1. Could they be related? Little Ching. It was another call that sounded like it came from another world. The person asleep on the bed suddenly opened her eyes, the sleepiness gone immediately. She had not been shocked awake from her dreams for so long. She had heard that voice once again. Qingyu furrowed up her brows as she massaged her aching head, and then looked out the window. It was pitch dark outside, just past the chua hour, right in the middle of the night. Since she was now awake, she did not intend to go back to sleep, and was about to go over the burial soul arts a few more times, when she pricked up the tips of her ears, having heard some faint voice. Her gaze sharpened. Who would come around here so late in the middle of the night? The Lake Central Pavilion was built in the center of the Eternal Peace Duke Manor's northern courtyard. There were no bridges connected to it, and one had to row a little boat across the wide expanse of water to enjoy the scenic view it provided, where many regal water lilies and many types of water plants thrived. The night was quiet, and the moon hung bright in the sky. The lake's surface that should be still at this time, however, rippled intermittently in widening circles, with a few bubbles occasionally being stirred up. Did you find anything? Hurry up. It won't be good if people see it when day breaks. A person was standing within the Lake Central Pavilion, and was leaning over its railing as he spoke in a hushed whisper. There was no response for quite a while, and just when that person was about to say something again, the sound of paddling in the water sounded, and a head poked out from below the water's surface, panting as a voice spoke. The lake is too deep. I can't even see its bottom clearly after diving for so long. Did you even see anything at all? What else can there be besides fish, prawns, and sludge in here? I think that fellow was just playing us for fools. The person in the water said indignantly, as his gaze then turned sharply onto a person sleeping soundly in the corner of the pavilion. If one did not look carefully, one might really not notice that there was a person lying there asleep. Hearing that, the person leaning over the railing could not help himself, but twitched the corner of his mouth. Had they really been played? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Here they were being so busy, and he was just sleeping there like a pig, claiming that he would only provide information and not offer any physical effort. But the most important thing was whether the information he provided was real. Forget it then. Just come up first, and I'll go down to check. The person in the water agreed, and then leapt cleanly out of the water, to land inside the pavilion. Despite having been in the water for so long, there was a single drop of water on his clothes or in his hair, looking completely clean and fresh, a feat that no ordinary person was capable of. A plop then sounded in the lake. The person who had been in the pavilion earlier had leapt into the water, and no sign of him could be seen almost immediately, tranquility returning back over the water's surface gradually. Chapter 127. 2. Could they be related? The person who had been sleeping in the corner finally stirred slightly, seemingly having been awakened by the sound of water. He let out a lazy yawn as he sat himself up, beery-eyed as he asked, "You haven't found it yet? The lake is very deep, and I do not take well to water like him, as I am not able to remain inside for so long." So he went down to take a look instead. Oh, I see. After another long sleepy yawn, he was just about to fall back asleep. "What are all you doing?" A clear and alluring voice tinged with the chill of the night sounded, sending shivers up their spine. The man who was feeling so very sleepy felt the icy chill, and his body stiffened up before he could fall asleep, as he turned his head slowly. On the other side of the lake's central pavilion, a young lady dressed in a snow-white inner robe stood, her long hair spread over her back a little messily. The tiny exquisitely beautiful face was so fair it was blinding, her phoenix-like eyes narrowed, staring at them watchfully, to see what they were up to. The man suddenly smiled a little sheepishly, as he stretched his hand out to give a friendly wave. "Little lass, no need to fear, it's all right there on our side." Qingyu's brows knitted up. This man? Isn't he that gray-robed guy among Lu Junyao and his gang? What is he doing not sleeping in the middle of night, but had come here so sneakily to the Eternal Peace Duke Manor instead? He had not seen such an unfriendly look on the young lady's face, before, which seemed to be suspecting that they were up to no good here. Just as he was struggling hard to think how he was supposed to explain all this, some sounds came out over the water's surface when it gurgled with bubbles, like someone was going to come up. A stroke of genius suddenly struck him, and he discreetly gathered power into his palm to push the person beside him, who had just moments ago come up and was now peering over the water's surface, down into the lake with a strike, who coincidentally struck the person whose head was just coming out of the water, causing the two people to swallow a large gulp of water in surprise. The gray-robed man said with a laugh, "The weather is really too hot," and the two of them were unable to sleep. "It was heard that the water here is especially cold, and they dragged me here with them to have a soak." "Ha ha ha. Everything's fine. We must have woken you up from your sleep. Just go back and sleep then. We'll leave in a while." Qingyu was silent. The two people in the lake, who had almost choked to death. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, who had forcibly dragged you here for a soak, telling a mouthful of lies without even blinking. That fella had been the one who refused to let them sleep, and had pulled them all the way out here to torment them like this. Hearing the man's words, Qingyu could not help but felt the corner of her mouth twitch before she asked in a doubtful tone, "The autumn season is already almost upon us, and the nights are getting cold. You guys came here just to swim? Does he take her for an idiot?" The gray-robed man's smile froze on his face. "This little lass really isn't easy to fool. But that fella by Ji Yan had said that the lass must not find out, and even if she discovered them, they must not speak the truth. Although he does not know why they were being so sneaky about it himself. But Bai Ji Yan was usually the smart one who thought things through well, so what he said could not possibly be wrong." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.